The edge of the universe is not a place, but a silence. Nebulae drift through the dark, like slow-moving ghosts, swirling in patterns that have not changed for eons. There is no friction here, no wind, only the vast rhythmic pulse of expanding light. Then, the rhythm breaks. A sound like grinding glass shatters the stillness. It begins as a hairline fracture in the dark, a thin, jagged line of jagged light that defies the geometry of the void. The rift expands. It tears through the fabric of space with a violent, screeching force, drawing the surrounding nebulae into its hungry maw. The vacuum screams as the tear widens, spilling raw energy into the quiet dark. Debris from shattered stars pulses against the edges of the wound. Something is leaking into reality. Or perhaps reality is being pulled out. The rift pulses with a deep, rhythmic thrum that vibrates through the very center of the void. Every star in the vicinity flickers, struggling to maintain its position against the gravitational pull of the tear. The silence is gone, replaced by the chaotic roar of space coming undone. The rift is no longer just a hole, it is a mouth, wide and waiting, casting long, distorted shadows across the cooling gas clouds. The tearing sound of the rift dampened, muffled by a sudden rhythmic pulsing of golden light. From the center of the jagged opening, a single lotus flower materialized, suspended in the vacuum, as if anchored to the foundation of reality itself. Its petals were oversized, translucent, and glowing with a soft, steady hum that pushed back the encroaching shadows. Krishna stepped onto the center of the bloom. His skin radiated a deep, luminescent blue that cut through the harsh glare of the rift. He did not look at the tear. He looked into the void beyond it. Where the rift had been erratic and hungry, the space around the lotus became unnaturally still. The swirling nebulae slowed, their chaotic motion settling into perfect, concentric circles around him. He moved with a deliberate, measured grace, his weightless stance defying the gravitational distortion pulling at the stars. He reached out a hand, and the jagged edges of the rift began to smooth, the violent screeching fading into a low, harmonic vibration. The void no longer felt like a place of destruction. It felt like a stage. He waited, his expression fixed on the horizon, his presence anchoring the center of the universal rupture. The harmonic stillness surrounding the lotus lasted only a heartbeat. A sound tore through the void. Not the screech of the rift, but a deep, rolling thunder that shook the very foundations of the surrounding nebulae. The sound had weight. It displaced the light, forcing the blue glow of the lotus to flicker and dim. From the upper reaches of the darkness, a strike of white light splintered the blackness into 1,000 jagged fragments. A figure dropped from the epicenter of the blast, descending with a controlled, predatory speed. Each movement pulsed with rhythmic surges of white electricity, arcs of current leaping from his skin and snapping against the cold vacuum. The atmosphere around him became turbulent, swirling with invisible forces that mimicked a gale. He landed with a force that sent ripples through the fabric of space, his eyes searing with the same white intensity as the lightning that birthed his arrival. He stood poised, the air vibrating with the hum of his own kinetic energy. The silence of the universe was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and the constant, rhythmic crackle of his presence. He occupied the space as if he owned the void itself, his posture rigid and his focus absolute. The confrontation had arrived. Zeus stood amidst the swirling static, his fingers locked tight around the golden bolt. His knuckles turned white. The skin stretched thin over bone as he leaned forward, every muscle coiled for a strike. The weapon in his hand hummed with a high-pitched vibration that made the surrounding starlight quiver. Across the short distance, Krishna stood motionless on the floating lotus. He had been poised to play his flute, the instrument raised near his lips, but he stopped. He held the position for a heartbeat, then slowly lowered the flute to his side. The movement was fluid, devoid of any defensive reflex. He tilted his chin down, bowing his head in a gesture that was neither submissive nor defiant, but profoundly calm. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of two opposing forces. Zeus watched, his jaw set hard, his eyes scanning for a flicker of fear or a hidden weapon. He found none. Krishna stood still, his gaze fixed on the space between them. his posture open and unmoving. The electricity surging around Zeus crackled against the stillness of the lotus, creating a rhythmic, jarring contrast. Neither moved, neither spoke. The entire sector of the universe seemed to hold its breath, caught in the widening gap between raw, trembling power and absolute, unwavering serenity.
Zeus did not wait for an answer. He shifted his weight, planting his feet firmly against the nothingness of the void. The air around him distorted, warping into a sphere of intense heat as he pulled his arm back. The golden bolt in his grip ignited, turning from a dull glow to a blinding, piercing white.
Sparks began to spray out like shrapnel, scorching the dark edges of the nearby nebulae. He swung his arm forward in one smooth, violent motion. The bolt left his hand with a sound that could not be heard, but could be felt as a physical blow to the chest. It cut through the void, a jagged white line that sliced the darkness into two distinct, unequal halves. As it traveled, it lit up the jagged rift, revealing the swirling, chaotic depths of the space tier in terrifying detail. The light caught the edges of the rift, causing the shadows to recoil, and the stellar dust to vaporize instantly. The streak was absolute, a concentrated lance of energy aiming directly for the center of the lotus. It traveled with a terrifying, unstoppable momentum, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. Every atom in the path of the bolt vibrated in anticipation of the impact, as the blinding arc of pure force dominated the entire field of vision, rushing toward its target.
The lightning bolt closed the final distance, a searing white lance tearing through the vacuum.
It moved with the force of a falling star, aimed squarely at the center of the lotus. Krishna did not flinch.
He did not retreat. He simply raised his right hand, palm outward, fingers spread in a gesture of absolute stillness.
The bolt did not strike. It did not explode on contact. Instead, it shuddered. The blinding white light began to buckle and fold inward, as if colliding with an invisible, impenetrable wall. The momentum drained away instantly. The bolt slowed, then stalled, hanging suspended in the void just inches from the center of Krishna's palm. It hovered there, vibrating with a frantic, trapped energy. It pulsed like a living thing, casting a harsh, flickering glow across Krishna's steady features. The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. The lethal charge, capable of shattering mountains, now bobbed in the air like a bird caught in a cage. There was no sound of thunder, only the faint, rhythmic hum of the energy struggling against an unseen barrier. Krishna held his hand perfectly steady, his gaze locked onto the shimmering weapon, watching it strain against the boundaries of his influence. The lightning bolt continued its futile vibration, caught in the invisible grip of the palm before it. Krishna watched the trapped light with quiet focus. Then he moved. With a single, sharp flick of his wrist, the geometry of the bolt broke. The solid line of white electricity fractured into 1,000 jagged segments. These pieces did not fall. They drifted outward, losing their intensity as they dispersed into the void. The blinding roar of the charge faded into a soft, dying hiss, leaving behind only swirling motes of harmless golden dust that vanished into the darkness. Zeus stood motionless on the opposite side of the rift. His hand, which had held the weapon with such absolute certainty, remained outstretched in the empty air. His jaw tightened, the muscles of his face pulling taut in a mask of grim frustration. He looked from his empty palm to the space where his power had been erased, his eyes narrowing as the weight of the situation settled. The disbelief was palpable. He had committed his strength to a final, decisive blow, only to see it unmade as if it were nothing more than smoke in a gale. He lowered his arm slowly, his grip loosening, while the silence of the universe rushed back in to fill the void left by the fading sparks. The silence did not last. A low, rhythmic thrumming began to vibrate through the space between the two figures. It was not a sound, but a pressure that rippled outward from the jagged tear in the universe. Where the golden sparks of the lightning had drifted, they suddenly stopped, caught in an invisible current that dragged them back toward the rift. Krishna turned his gaze toward the darkness, his expression sharpening. Zeus followed his line of sight, his muscles tensing once more, though this time the intent was not aggression. A shadow, darker than the void itself, began to peel away from the edges of the rift. It was thick, viscous, and shifting, a formless mass that resisted any fixed geometry. As it pushed into the expanse, it reached out with tendrils of smoke to consume the lingering energy of the spent lightning bolt. The entity drank the residual power, its mass expanding with every pulse of light it absorbed. It was an intrusion of chaotic matter, an apex predator of the void now entering their sphere of influence. Both Zeus and Krishna stood back as the entity solidified, a monstrous, evolving presence that turned the focus of the universe away from their conflict and toward a singular, encroaching terror. The shadow grew, shedding the last remnants of the rift as it stretched into the infinite. It was no longer a mere mass of smoke. It was a hungry, expanding geometry of destruction.
Typhon opened a maw that seemed to encompass the very concept of silence. A sound erupted, not a scream, but a seismic displacement of reality that tore through the vacuum. Nearby stars, hanging like distant lanterns in the dark, stuttered and then fractured, their brilliance dimming as the sound waves hit them like physical hammers. The entity pulsed, its form bloating outward, consuming the surrounding space with a frantic, aggressive hunger.
Every flicker of its shifting surface sent ripples of distortion across the nebulae, turning once stable clouds of gas into jagged, chaotic debris. There was no retreat from the sound. It echoed in the marrow of space itself.
The sheer volume of his presence pushed against the boundaries of the universe,
causing the fabric of the void to strain and sag under the weight of his expansion. The darkness was no longer empty. It was occupied by a singular,
overwhelming force that signaled an end to everything that had come before.
Doom was not a distant possibility, but an immediate, encroaching reality that filled every corner of the sky. The final echoes of the roar died away, leaving a jagged, hollow silence in their wake. Zeus stood firm for a heartbeat, his knuckles still white around the grip of his weapon, but the electricity that usually danced along his skin had vanished. He watched the entity continue its relentless expansion, its mass bending the light of distant nebulae into impossible curves. He shifted his weight, and for the first time, his stance faltered. The golden bolt in his hand felt heavy, an anchor of dead weight rather than a source of command. He took a single step backward, his boots sliding against the invisible floor of the void. The confidence that had defined his presence in the cosmos drained away, replaced by the stark realization that his strength was not enough to halt this tide. He looked at the weapon, then at the shifting, monstrous form before him. His fingers loosened. The crackle of power that usually signaled his authority was gone, leaving only a faint, dying hum. Zeus drew a ragged breath, his shoulders slumping under a burden he could no longer carry alone. He had faced wars and rebellion, but this was a force that defied the laws he had built his reign upon. He retreated again, his eyes wide, witnessing the dissolution of his own certainty. Krishna did not wait for the inevitable. As the shadow loomed, he stepped forward, his feet silent upon the floating lotus. His face remained fixed, a mask of absolute calm amidst the fraying edges of reality. He reached out, his hands moving with the grace of a master, and retrieved the instrument from his side. The metal caught the dim light of the dying stars as he lifted it. He did not rush. He did not look at the monster, nor at the broken king behind him. He simply set the flute against his lips. The first note was not a sound, but a physical pulse, a vibration that traveled through the vacuum and struck the encroaching shadow like a physical blade. The chaotic roar of the entity faltered, caught in the sudden, sharp clarity of the melody. It was a sound that tasted of ancient water and mountain air, cutting through the heavy, stale atmosphere of the void. Where the music touched the air, the darkness quivered and recoiled. Krishna played again, a higher, sharper sequence that sliced through the thick, suffocating pressure of the shadow. The music was a wall of intent, a steady, rhythmic command that forced the world to listen. The entity surged, its form twisting in frustration, but the notes held their ground, weaving a path of resistance through the absolute dark. The melody deepened, pulling threads of light from the surrounding void. With every breath, Krishna drew. The notes shimmered and hung in the air, refusing to dissipate. They began to connect, tracing sharp, luminous lines across the darkness. A triangle formed, then a hexagon, the edges glowing with an intense sapphire hue. The music became denser,
vibrating with a physical weight that pressed against the encroaching shadow. As the patterns multiplied,
they snapped together, interlocking like the gears of an ancient mechanism. A wall of blue geometry coalesced, a lattice of light that hummed with a low, constant frequency. It was no longer just sound, it was architecture. The structure expanded, spanning the width of the rift, its surface shifting as the light refracted through the complex angles.
The shadow of the entity slammed against the barrier, the collision sending ripples of static through the grid.
The lines glowed brighter, absorbing the force of the impact and distributing it across the entire frame. The grid held. It stood firm, a transparent shield of ordered light separating the encroaching void from the space beyond. Krishna continued to play, his fingers dancing over the instrument, weaving more light into the gaps, reinforcing the structural integrity of the barrier against the relentless pressure of the encroaching darkness.
Typhon lunged. A massive, amorphous limb surged forward, its edges jagged and dark as oil.
It struck the blue lattice with a sound like grinding stone. Where the shadow claws touched the light, the geometry flickered,
the sapphire lines dimming under the corrosive contact. Typhon pressed harder, its form expanding,
pulsing with the raw energy it had stolen from the void. The barrier groaned, a low, metallic vibration that shook the very space around it. A hairline fracture appeared in the center of the grid, a jagged dark vein spreading through the blue light. Krishna did not look away. He adjusted his grip and shifted the melody, the notes coming faster, shorter, more urgent. He forced the barrier to vibrate at a higher frequency. The fracture hissed, sparks of light showering into the abyss as the grid struggled to knit itself back together.
Typhon shrieked, a sound that shattered the silence of the nebula and slammed its weight against the wall again.
The barrier bowed, stretching thin, but it did not break. Krishna countered the pressure with a rapid, rhythmic sequence, forcing the blue light to thicken and harden. The struggle locked them in place, a stalemate of light and shadow, both sides pushing against the limit of their existence. Zeus stood motionless, his eyes tracking the shifting blue geometry. He watched how the lattice bent, absorbing the violent thrusts of the shadow without shattering. The patterns were not random. They followed a precise, mathematical rhythm that defied the chaos of the rift. He reached out, his fingertips hovering near a glowing segment of the barrier. A hum vibrated through his hand, a frequency that matched the pulse in his own veins. He had fought alone for eons, trusting only in the force of his own will. Now, he saw the flaw in that solitude. The barrier was not just a wall, it was a bridge. He studied the interplay between the sound waves and the light, noting how the melody dictated the density of the structure. He tilted his head, listening to the underlying cadence of the flute. It was an invitation. He felt the static of his own energy wanting to merge with the blue light. The doubt that had held him back began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He looked at Krishna, then back at the pulsing grid. He understood the requirement. He drew a deep breath, shifted his stance, and raised his hands, preparing to feed his own lightning into the weave of the music.
Zeus planted his feet wide, his heels digging into the intangible floor of the void. He raised both arms,
palms turned toward the darkened expanse above the rift. He did not call for the storm. He commanded the energy to manifest from the very fabric of space. A low, grinding roar echoed through the nebula as the vacuum began to tear. Thin, jagged lines of white heat appeared, spiderwebbing across the dark horizon. Then, the first arc of gold ignited. It snapped against his skin, jumping from his fingertips to his shoulders, a frantic living web of electricity. He clenched his fists, forcing the wild arcs to converge. The light intensified, turning from a flicker to a blinding, rhythmic pulse that drowned out the stars. His muscles strained with the weight of the gathering current. He pulled his hands apart, and the storm expanded, a massive golden canopy unfurling over the battlefield. The void, once pitch black, was now washed in a harsh, electric glare that exposed the shifting, oily mass of the enemy. Zeus channeled the entire output of the storm into his core, his body glowing with a brilliance that made the rift look like a dying coal. He held the power at a breaking point, waiting for the signal to strike. Krishna did not falter. He blew a long, low note that rippled through the air, creating a series of concentric blue rings.
Zeus stepped forward, driving his golden lightning directly into the center of the melody.
The impact was immediate and violent. Arcs of gold shattered against the blue rings, sending sparks spiraling into the void.
The ground, if it could be called that, shook under the force of the collision. Zeus gritted his teeth, locking his elbows as he funneled the entirety of his storm into the geometric patterns. The blue light flared,
turning white at the edges as it absorbed the raw electricity. For a heartbeat, the two energies buckled against each other, creating a vacuum that pulled everything toward the center. Krishna adjusted his fingers on the flute, shifting the pitch to harmonize with the electrical frequency. The discord vanished. The golden lightning smoothed into ribbons of light, weaving seamlessly through the blue geometry. A sphere began to take shape, a spinning orb of fused power that hummed with a sound like grinding metal. The light grew until it swallowed the immediate space, turning the dark void into a single, blinding point of absolute intensity. Both characters stood firm, their combined wills anchored to the sphere as it pulsed, ready to be unleashed.
Krishna and Zeus moved in unison, thrusting their combined power toward the heart of the shadow.
The sphere streaked across the void like a falling star, leaving a trail of ionized gas in its wake.
Typhon saw the projectile and lunged, his massive, shifting limbs stretching out to engulf the light. He opened his maw to swallow the energy, but the sphere did not vanish. It detonated on contact with his core.
A shockwave of pure brilliance rippled outward, hitting the shadow with the force of a collapsing sun.
Typhon let out a sound that shattered the surrounding silence. His form, previously fluid and expanding, began to harden and crack.
Great chunks of obsidian-like darkness flaked away, turning into ash before they could hit the ground.
The sphere pinned him against the rift, feeding the light directly into the tear in space. With a final, violent surge, the shadow was torn apart. It disintegrated into thin gray smoke that drifted into the shrinking gap.
The rift groaned, its jagged edges pulling together until they touched and sealed. The void was suddenly empty. The crushing pressure of the conflict vanished, leaving only the cold, silent expanse of space. The victory was absolute, marked by the slow dissipation of the last remaining wisps of darkness. The echoes of the battle died away, leaving the vacuum of space to reclaim its silence. Zeus let his arm fall, the weight of his golden bolt dragging his hand toward the floor. He pressed his weight onto his staff, his chest rising and falling in deep, ragged breaths. Small sparks of residual electricity still jumped between his fingers, but they lacked the intensity of his earlier fury. Across the expanse, Krishna remained still. He stood with his feet planted firmly, his posture relaxed despite the recent violence. The lotus beneath him flickered, its edges turning translucent as the source of its manifestation began to wane. He lowered his flute, the sound of his last note lingering for a moment before fading into the absolute quiet. Wisps of starlight drifted away from the petals, dissolving into the dark void like melting snow. The air, charged with the ozone of the conflict, slowly returned to its natural, frigid state. There was no movement now, only the rhythmic sound of Zeus breathing and the subtle shimmering of the dying light. The universe settled into a hollow stillness, the rift gone, the threat dissolved, and the weight of the moment settling over the two figures as they stood in the vast, empty dark. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, across the expanse between them. Zeus straightened his spine, the wood of his staff groaning under his shifting weight. He fixed his gaze on Krishna. There was no trace of the lightning or the fury that had dominated only moments before. He studied the stillness of the other figure, searching for some sign of the struggle, but found only a profound, hollow calm. Krishna met the stare without blinking. He held his ground on the fading platform, his posture perfectly vertical, a pillar of stability in the void. Time seemed to drag, the distance between them feeling less like physical space and more like a bridge being built across ancient, unspoken boundaries. Zeus finally broke the stillness. He tipped his head, a single, sharp movement of recognition that acknowledged the shared burden of the fight. It was a gesture of heavy, earned respect. Without looking back, he turned his body toward the distant, golden glow of Olympus. The light pulled at him, drawing him forward. He took the first step, his boots finding purchase on the emptiness, and began the long journey back to his realm. Krishna watched the departure, his expression remaining unreadable as the distance between them grew, marking the end of their brief, violent intersection. Krishna stood alone as the golden glow from the receding figure grew smaller,
shrinking until it was nothing more than a pinprick against the infinite dark he did not follow.
He turned his attention back to the void where the rift had once torn the fabric of space. The lotus beneath him flickered, the petals curling inward,
turning from vibrant light into gray ash that drifted away into the vacuum. He felt the platform lose its substance,
the solid ground beneath his feet dissolving into cold, empty space. Krishna did not falter. He stepped off the vanishing light and moved forward into the absolute shadow. He raised the flute one last time.
A single, clear note pierced the silence, vibrating through the emptiness like a physical thread.
The sound did not bounce. It traveled, stretching thin across the expanse until it became indistinguishable from the background hum of the universe. He continued walking, his movements fluid and purposeful,
retreating into the depths where light could not reach. The melody followed him, growing quieter with every step, until it was only a faint, haunting rhythm. Then, the sound stopped. The space where he had been was empty, leaving behind nothing but the lingering, impossible echo of a song that had already begun to fade into mystery.